Um, hmm, Let me reshare and make sure I'm sharing sound. There's really only one slide that needs that, but yeah, it's sharing sound. Okay. Now, um, thank you, Depani. Thank you, everyone, for your interest, an opportunity to share some research from this part of the world, this part being the Eastern North Pacific. And yes, my name is on this presentation. And yes, I'm going to tell you about some of the research I've been working on, but this research does require specialists from different areas, and there are many people along the way that you'll see showing up who make this work possible. And I think maybe what originally caught Tapani's attention was a paper we published last year. That was focused on bluefin and humpback whales, the three um, the three baleen whale species in our region that produce the most sound. Uh, and it is sound, passive acoustic monitoring, that really got me into marine mammal research in the first place, and that we use as one of the key data resources to understand behavioral ecology and even conservation, as I'll get into. For this talk, though, I thought it would be good to focus really in on one species for the most part, and that's blue whales. The reason for that is that we have the best data for them, as you'll see. So, when they're at the surface, we're able to observe the most massive animal ever to exist uh, with light, but they don't have to dive far below the surface before light is not going to tell us much. In contrast, we can hear a blue whale if it's anywhere within an area thousands of square kilometers around our single hydrophone, especially in this deep water habitat. We can hear them over a very large region, and so we take advantage of that. I see. So I'm co-host. That's why I'm seeing all these admits. I'll admit somebody too. But what it's doing is interfering with my ability to progress through the slideshow. There we go. Okay, so the study region is the Eastern North Pacific. Here we are. Latitude roughly 37 north. Monterey Bay is our backyard. And Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary is an important region for us to contribute scientific knowledge toward conservation and resource management. So the sanctuary includes approximately 300 kilometers of the coastline, shelf, slope, and deep water habitat, particularly offshore where Davidson Seamount was subsequently later added as part of the sanctuary because partly because remotely operated vehicle observations, video of this seamount showed what an incredible biodiversity hotspot it is. So now it includes these two regions. The process that I'm going to focus on in many ways is coastal upwelling. You know the story. When winds are blowing alongshore toward the equator in the northern hemisphere, you'll get transport of surface water away from the coast, and deep, cold, nutrient-rich water rises to the surface. The cold water you can see here in the cooler colors, these plumes emanating from the coast and flowing sinuously through the coastal ocean margin habitat. And of course, we see the physical signature, but that nutrient-rich water fuels the growth of microscopic algae that we can see in ocean color. This is a Veer's image. And these are nearly simultaneous images, by the way. So you can see that the cold upwelled water is relatively poor in phytoplankton simply because it's nutrient rich, but phytoplankton have not had time to grow. In contrast, here in the bay, where stratification sets up and nutrients are injected, you get accumulation of phytoplankton biomass. And of course, that's transported by dynamics such as this anticyclonic eddy. So that is the first important point about upwelling, is that it fuels all life in the ecosystem, of course, by enhancing primary productivity that flows through the food web from this core process. Really magical process, translation of non-living matter into living matter powered by light. So passive acoustic sensing was my entry point to studying mammals, and MARS, it stands for Monterey Accelerated Research System. That's a cabled observatory. The cable I haven't shown here, but it runs from our lab right here in Moss Landing over the northern shelf down the slope to a feature called Smooth Ridge. And it's unlimited power and communications, which is just a phenomenal advantage for scientific research. And here I'm just going to show a brief section here, 34 minutes of sound recorded at Mars. And this is spectrum level above background. So I've just subtracted the first percentile from every frequency band so that you see the signal above background more simply and clearly. And everywhere you see brighter colors is sound at that time and pitch, that frequency. And you can see a lot of sound here, and almost all of it. There's a little trace of some anthropogenic noise through here, but all of this highly structured sound occurrence is due to baleen whales. They can completely dominate the soundscape during certain times of the year in particular. And you're noticing a lot of structure probably by now, and this kind of looks like this, and this kind of looks like this. um, and and so on. You're seeing repeated sequences of sound known as themes, well, phrases repeated as themes in humpback whale song. This is by far the most complex acoustic behavior or result of acoustic behavior that we see, many places the world see. The humpbacks can sing across a frequency range that reaches right near the lower limit of our hearing to even above the upper limit of our hearing, more than a piano. In contrast, much simpler but highly structured acoustic sequences are produced by blue and fin whales. And along the right here, I'm just marking the approximate frequency range for the species during this segment. And so, for example, I'll focus on, I'll make a note about fin whales. Their songs are relatively simple, very percussive pulses at regular intervals, sometimes varying the pitch a bit. Now, just a bit more complicated here, we have blue whale song with an A call followed by a series of B calls. Now, what you're looking at for the B calls, here's the fundamental down near 14 hertz, then the harmonics, and it's this third harmonic right here that has the most energy. So we tend to focus on that for our analyses. What I'll point out here is this very bright call is high intensity. Notice that after every one of these, there's a lower intensity call, like a call and response between two individuals. So let's listen in. If I was with you in person and we were in a room, I would bring a subwoofer, which would move a lot of air for these low frequency sounds, and you would feel the blue whale sounds more than you would hear them. Your lungs would rattle. The walls might shake a bit because I like to turn it up. Things might rattle, but it give you, even though it's in air, it's not in water, which would be much more real for how they experience sound. Not that without that mismatch between the density of air and density of water, you would really be immersed in their sounds, and it would move right through you. But nonetheless, I'll give you a sense of what we mean by song, rhythmic structured sequences. With this ACB sequence from a blue whale, we're going to play it at 10 times original speed. So, of course, time's going to go by faster, and the pitch is going to be raised beyond reality. But you'll at least hear the structure. Now it's a minute between this call and this one in reality. This one's really subtle. And depending on your speakers, you may not have heard the C, but it's always a precursor to the B call. Centered down near 11 hertz, so really low frequency. Okay, so that is an introduction to blue whale song. They can just alternate A, B, one of each repeatedly. They can do an A with many Bs after them or a few. They mix it up, but in our region, it's 3 calls that they put together for song. Now, similarly, just to give you a sense of fin whale song, I mentioned its pulses, very brief pulses, powerful. Again, if we were in the same room with a subwoofer, you would feel it more than hear it because the peak energy is down near 20 hertz and even below. Some of their pulses are close to 17 hertz peak energy. But let's speed it up 15 times normal speed, and then that pitches it up so you can hear the structure of a song. This is a really catchy tune. It's going to stick in your head. But you get the idea. This is actually close to 20 hertz in reality and 17 hertz. These are about a second apart as you listen now, but in reality, it's about 15 seconds apart. So blue whales and fin whales are acoustically present much of the year. Here's a time series of what we call a call index. Anna Shirovich introduced this long ago, and it's an incredibly useful way to characterize the acoustic presence of these species because of how stereotypical these calls are. The energy is always in a certain frequency band, and you can do a simple signal to noise, peak call energy to the background, as you know where those are. And so what you see is an annual cycle. Every year we hear the occurrence of song produced only by males of these species. It rises and it falls, and it rises because the animals begin the acoustic behavior. They're present already in summer, but it's not till late summer, early fall that they begin to sing. So that's why you see a rise every year. Now, the fall every year, which is highly variable, is not because they have stopped singing. They're still singing their hearts out, but they're too far away for us to hear them. They're in their breeding habitat at low latitudes. So we can see that song is a very important part of the behavioral ecology of these species, far more than you even see here. Now, omnidirectional passive acoustic monitoring allows us to hear these species from a large area, and that's a great advantage. But if we have a little bit more information from acoustic vector sensing, specifically, both an ordinary omnidirectional hydrophone and an acoustic vector sensor, they sense the pressure signal that you're using to hear me now. The acoustic vector sensor also senses particle motion, 3-dimensional particle motion with accelerometry. And that allows us to go beyond saying, I heard a blue whale, to the blue whale's over there. We get a bearing from the receiver to the sound source. We don't have a range. We don't know how far away it is, so we can't put it on a map, but we can use that bearing information to inform ecological research, as I'll share. Now, the first thing you need to know is, does it work? Can you use an acoustic vector sensor on this cabled observatory to point to where the calling animals are, at least the bearing? So what you're looking at here is ground truth, an example of ground truth, where we've got animal-borne sensors on the back of a blue whale, and the hydrophone and the accelerometer are measuring the same thing, this series of B calls, song. Between these two bouts of B calls, the animal's at the surface breathing. This line shows the depth of the animal on this axis. So you can see a bit of song, breathing, song. And the accelerometer, the fact that you pick up the signal on the accelerometer says that this animal's body is vibrating with that sound production, and you're more certain that this sound is from the animal that you tagged. So the animal that we tagged, the Goldbogen lab at Stanford, Jeremy Goldbogen's lab tagged, was at the time located right here off of Carmel Bay. And that's a GPS location, very accurate. And this green cone from the Mars Observatory defines the bearing range for these 5 calls after the animal dove after breathing. And these are the temporally aligned calls received at the Mars Observatory, both the sound energy and the bearing estimate. And you can see how distinct those calls are from the background. The bearing information is quite strong and clear. So this ground truth gives us confidence that we can look at years of acoustic vector sensing to study the movement ecology of blue whales. Krill are another critical aspect of this study, of course, because blue whales in this region feed almost exclusively on krill. Here are krill, imaged by a camera on a remotely operated vehicle. This location was along the continental shelf break next to Monterey Submarine Canyon, which is an important foraging habitat for the whales. They often do intensively forage along the shelf break where these krill swarms form. And when a blue whale is, the blue whales have to find these incredibly dense patches of krill so that all of the effort that they put into lunge feeding pays off. And here's an example from Jeremy Goldbogen's lab at Stanford of there's a camera on the back of this blue whale looking at this blue whale. And what you'll see is this blue whale lunging, opening like a parachute, taking in a mass of water that weighs more than its own body, and within a 1 to 2 minute period, squeezing out that water and being left with just the krill. And on a single breath hold dive, these whales may lunge feed, up to 7 or 8 times even. So a phenomenal amount of effort, and they need to find the very dense patches to survive. So beyond primary productivity that we introduced at the beginning, upwelling, wind-driven upwelling, also drives prey aggregation. That's a critical part of their behavioral ecology. The whales have evolved to locate these dense krill swarms. And I'm not going to get into some of the biologging data that shows just how, excuse me, how precisely they target these fine-scale oceanographic features that host these krill aggregations. But we can talk about it during Q&A, and I can pull it up. But for now, I want to just highlight some of the discoveries about the relationships between physical forcing and krill, as well as anchovies, which is relevant to other baleen whale species, and both krill and anchovy relevant to many predators. But this is work led by Kelly Benoit Bird, who's also at MBARI, Chad, who works with Kelly and is her husband, and myself. We were looking at how krill and particularly anchovy respond to wind-driven upwelling. And from a year of observations from multiple platforms, what you see here is a very strong relationship between the index for wind-driven upwelling and the aggregation index of prey species that are critical in the ecosystem. Very strong relationship. What does that look like? Well, let's take a look at some slices through Monterey Bay. Here's a satellite sea surface temperature image when upwelling was not active. You see the relatively warmer temperatures. And here, about a week later, we have upwelling active, where you can see the much cooler temperatures. And this upwelling plume originates at the coast and it flows through the coastal habitat like this. And acoustically, we slice through this same region of the bay over Monterey Submarine Canyon. And what you can see is in this acoustic backscatter data, you can see differences in the distribution and concentration of prey. And I'm just going to focus on these two examples, both krill identified acoustically and with video. So we know these were krill. You can see when wind-driven upwelling was not active, they're there. They're present, but they're not densely concentrated. The densely concentrated patches are seen during upwelling, slicing through this upwelling plume. And of course, this scale tells you the concentration based on acoustics, you could say. So the same amount of total biomass may be here, but if you're a whale, you're going to love this, because when you open your mouth, you're going to get a lot more calories per unit effort during upwelling. So another aspect of upwelling, it shapes blue whale movement ecology. And this is the first study based on acoustic vector sensing that I'll share with you. This study was published in Ecology Letters. And again, I just want to emphasize how many people, how many specialists, how many good people, good researchers make this possible. You know, people who study forage species with acoustics, people who develop and apply acoustic vector sensing, people who model acoustic transmission so that we understand our listening footprint, people who get out there and put tags on the backs of whales, resource managers. Yeah, anyway, just really good people here that make this possible. So remembering here our ground truth, we can point to a whale. Here's our listening footprint. And this is a simple characterization based on what you might consider to be the median background noise level, because how well we can hear the whales depends on distinguishing signal from background. And so in very quiet conditions, our listening footprint would be even greater. And under noisy conditions, it would be smaller. But this is typical. And it just defines the domain within which a blue whale could be. And we would pick it up at our observatory with a signal to noise ratio sufficiently high for reliable bearing estimation, pointing to where the animals are located. So let's look at one time scale. Let's take a whole year of acoustic vector sensing. And this plot here shows the bearing relative to Mars. So west would mean the animal is out here, north up here, south, east, somewhere in this direction. And what you can see is a bimodal distribution with two peaks near these, dashed lines, the bearings to these dashed lines. Well, these dashed lines are on the map pointing to Point Año Nuevo and Point Sur. These are the two coastal upwelling centers in the region of the bay. All of the upwelled water that enters Monterey Bay from outside, which is most, originates from these coastal upwelling features typically. And so you can see the coldest water at the points, and then it flows into the coastal ocean. So there's right away we see this favoring of upwelling plume habitat. This upwelling plume and this upwelling plume. But you notice that we cannot hear fully south of Point Sur, and these upwelling plumes tend to flow to the south. So just physical constraints limit our ability to characterize blue whale movement ecology near this upwelling plume. In contrast, the one that originates north of Monterey Bay tends to flow southward into our listening domain. So this is the one that we can use continuous acoustic vector sensing to look at how blue whales respond to these wind-driven upwelling plumes. Based on the relationship you just saw with krill, we would predict that blue whales over millions of years have learned how to track these coastal upwelling plumes because that's where the forage is most dense. So let's do that. Let's look at that time scale. Now we're going to define a region of the bearing range that represents Monterey Bay, because upwelling plumes originating here tend to flow along the coast and into the bay, partly into the bay. Some of it also flows offshore, whether typically eddies steer that offshore transport. But they do flow into the bay. So what we have here is the upwelling index showing a series of pulses in the strength of upwelling. Now, this diamond here is the location of a mooring that has sensors through the upper 300 meters. And I'm just showing density, water density. Density increases with depth. And wherever you see these isopleths of density, isopycnals, rising to the surface, you have dense water at the surface. And that, of course, is the cold, dense water of the upwelling plume arriving into the bay. So what you notice is strong pulse in upwelling that brings cold, dense water into the bay where the mooring observed it, an upwelling plume in the bay. And when that happens, the percentage of blue whale call time originating from this bearing sector of the bay rises. Upwelling, wind-driven upwelling flows into the bay, the blue whales follow. The upwelling dies down, the plume dissipates, and the whales leave the bay. Then there's another pulse of upwelling in a series, and we see that the isopycnals coming to the surface, a series of plumes in the bay, and the whales are in the bay during that time, more prevalent in the bay. So some of the local population was totally tuned into this episodic upwelling and tracking it to find the food they need. And of course, these plumes are happening all along the coast. This dynamical feature of the ecosystem is critical foraging habitat, truly. And now foraging, I've been focused on song calls. Why? Because they're by far the most abundant acoustic signal and give us a chance to track more animals. However, foraging associated calls, D calls, occur less frequently. They're produced by both males and females, and we had a bout of foraging calls during this period. But you can see that the song calls just give us a lot more information for that continuous tracking. Now let's look at longer time scales. Upwelling phenology, meaning how does upwelling develop within a year and across years? There is a seasonal cycle, and the North Pacific high has a seasonal cycle, high pressure cell in the atmosphere, and that's what's driving upwelling. The eastern branch of that anticyclonic atmospheric circulation is what gives you the alongshore equatorward winds. It creates that, and that's what creates upwelling. So phenology, when we look at the phenology, we're wondering, how did that seasonal cycle develop? Did it start early? Was it unusually strong? Did it stay stronger into the fall? So when we look at that, this is critical to determining how long blue whales stay in this foraging habitat before migrating southward to low latitudes for the breeding season. And the first paper on that, I'm just going to highlight briefly. This was led by Will Astrike, who at the time was a graduate student. Then he became a postdoc with us. He was at Stanford for his grad studies. He came to work with us for his postdoc, and he's now in Switzerland. But his thesis really first explored how we can acoustically detect when blue whales shift into their southward migration. So I'll just highlight two aspects of that. And to do this, Will had to integrate not just the population level perspective we get from passive acoustic monitoring for a regional area, but also the individual level you get from biologging. So this is one tag, a medium duration tag deployed by Cascadia Research Collective, James Fallbush, John Kalambakidis, and others. Angela Szorka also helped develop this long-term tag. Great people. And what I want to emphasize is just a few things about this complex data set. The animals spent time foraging here just north of San Francisco Bay, and then it really just kind of bolted to lower latitudes for the breeding season. And this is a total period here of about a month. So you see the animal staying at one latitude, and what you're looking at in circles is the feeding effort, lunges per day. And the coloration of lunges per day tells you how much was happening day versus night, right? It's kind of a difference, represented as a difference. And then in triangles, what you're looking at is how much are they singing? You know, that ability to detect them through this prolific behavior. And what you see is that during this period, most of the singing, these triangles, is blue. So it's predominantly occurring during the night, because this is night minus day. In contrast, most of the feeding is happening during the day. Tag after tag actually shows this. They're very busy during the day feeding. They tend to transition into singing during dusk and into the night. But look what happens when the animal migrates south. First of all, feeding essentially stops. And you notice these blue triangles become more red triangles. So they're beginning to sing more even during the day. And that's the acoustic signature that we use. More song during the night, more song during the day. And so when we listen to a population, we can see that shift where the night to day ratio initially increases going into the fall, but then it drops and levels off and even becomes less than one as a ratio, that they're singing more during the day. So this is a way for us to detect acoustically when they're switching to migration just by listening. And that's what this second paper that Will led focused on. An acoustic signature reveals that blue whales tune their life history transition, specifically the transition to the breeding migration. They tune that to oceanographic conditions. What does that look like? Well, one perspective on that is the day and night call index, the intensity of calling. And when we distill that into a ratio of night to day, we see that as the night to day ratio decreases, this is our behavioral transition indicator. And so, and because we can characterize this continuously, we can look at when that transition happens, how intensively it happens each year, and whether there are multiple pulses of migration, as you see in this year, for example. And when we look at it as an annual total perspective, these plots, I'll just focus on the one on the left, but this is how early upwelling peaks and how much total upwelling occurs. Both of them tell you the same story, that there's a positive relationship. Stronger upwelling, ultimately producing more forage species biomass for blue whales and feeding them, results in a later behavioral transition. So they stay here longer if the ecosystem is feeding them better. Now, upwelling phenology, what we just focused on, also modulates blue whale ship strike risk. And this is my last sort of case study here. And here we're very much focused on acoustic vector sensing. The previous study I mentioned was omnidirectional sensing only. Now let's take advantage of spatial information. And zooming out here again to where we are, this is the blue whale biologically important area based on decades of sighting data. The deeper purple colors are, the core BIA, where they're most often seen in this foraging habitat. Let's zoom in to the Monterey Bay region. And this honeycomb is what you've seen before. It's the typical listening area. And now, in addition to understanding our listening domain, so a blue whale calling from any one of these honeycomb areas would be heard very well. So we can reliably point to them. These black lines are the shipping fairways, the recommended tracks. So if whales are out here, they're more likely to be struck by a ship. So if we define a bearing range with these white lines from Mars, we can say that if we hear a blue whale from the bearing range between these white lines, they're in higher risk habitat, more likely to be struck by a ship. And of course, this ship traffic and the potential for mortality from a collision with a ship is the primary concern for the recovery of this endangered population. And of course, here's our upwelling dynamics and our bathymetry showing that it's shelf, slope, and deep water habitat we're interested in. So here again is our blue whale annual cycle, and I've color-coded the 3 years so that we can distinguish them consistently. These are the 3 years for which we have continuous acoustic vector sensing data. And here's what the data look like in total. This is detection of blue whale beak calls, seconds per day per bearing sector of 20 degrees. So here's our bearing relative to Mars, and here's time progressing in upward in each year. And you can see the movement ecology that I described with blue whales moving into the bay with upwelling pulses. That's all right here in the second year, where you could see them moving from out of the west and north into east into the bay. Right, but what if we sum this over the year in total? We see that what we described for that 1 year with a peak at the upwelling centers, right? The first year was a peak at this upwelling center and this one. But every year we see that peak, particularly from the upwelling center to the south. To the north, it's more variable how spread they are around that upwelling center. And it's also more variable in how much of the calling is coming from that offshore habitat where they are more likely to be struck by ships. So right away, we can see as a percentage, higher percentage of calling from this gray shaded bearing sector, which corresponds with this bearing sector. This, if they're out here, there's more of a risk of a ship strike. So right away, we get a sense that there's higher ship strike risk for these calling whales in the third year, for example. But let's quantify that a little more accurately. What you're looking at here is the total detection in minutes per day and the number of days along the top that we were detecting them. So we're getting a lot of detection year after year. This is a reliable data set for characterizing this relationship to upwelling phenology. Now let's look at the daily exposure as a very simple metric. Each day we're quantifying the percent of calling from that bearing sector that is higher risk. And if we look at all days from each year, there's very clearly a relationship. There's very clearly a trend, increasing each year, higher risk of ship strike. But what's very interesting and important to understand is that it wasn't throughout the whole year. During summer, they were actually there's a decreasing trend, particularly for this last year, where they were spending a lower percent of time in that high-risk habitat. So they were spending more time in shelf and slope waters feeding, but it's the fall and winter where we see that very strong increase in the whales spending time offshore. So let's look at the relationship to upwelling phenology. This is the last bit of this story. Well, first of all, let's look at forage availability. This is krill catch at all these stations in 2019 versus 2021, the first versus the third year. In the second year, COVID affected sampling, so we can't compare that. But what you can see right away is a large shift in the abundance of krill, a large increase from the first to the third year. And if we look at the coastal upwelling transport index, this is just purely the physics, the upwelling of water, meters squared per second integrated. And the units are in the caption, sorry. But what you can see is that, again, we need to distinguish the seasons. During spring, there's a strong increase, a strong positive trend in wind-driven upwelling. And if we integrate many other factors, other key factors, the depth of the nutricline, the coastal upwelling plus Ekman pumping, the wind stress curl-driven upwelling, we see a very strong trend. And this habitat compression index, based on the area of cold water along the coast, also shows that expansion of foraging habitat for blue whales, expansion offshore. But this is during the spring, and we're sensing them acoustically during the fall and winter. So let's look at summer. We don't see the trend. Fall, winter, we don't see the trend. So the relationship to upwelling phenology is critical here. It's not just upwelling at the time we're listening to the whales that determines where they're living. There's a lag time. The expansion of foraging habitat and the tremendous enhancement in nutrient input to the ecosystem, which flows through the food web into forage species, is what's driving this habitat occupancy with a long lag. So my last topic is just, okay, so what are some of the ways that our science can contribute to conservation efforts? One of them is Whale Safe. They are working, this program is working with visual and acoustic data to try to inform ship operators about when they are moving into higher risk habitat. And we're listening right here, and we've just recently, last month, developed our real-time data workflow so that we can give hourly updates to this program for blue, fin, and humpback whales. Rachel Rhodes is leading that at Whale Safe. Also, this program is just phenomenal and phenomenally successful. It's called Protecting Blue Whales in Blue Skies, or just Blue Whales in Blue Skies now. And of course, if you have ship whale collisions as a primary threat to the recovery of the population, one of the most important things you can do is to slow down your ships. It reduces the risk of collision, and with collateral benefits of less air pollution and less noise pollution. So creating a healthier acoustic habitat for the whales to communicate. And this program began, you can see, in 2017, and has only been growing with regard to total distance traveled at so-called whale-safe speeds, less than 10 knots, and the cooperation from shipping companies. And I just want to emphasize, this is voluntary. And these shipping companies are doing this. And they're having a really big positive impact. So what does that look and sound like in Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary? Well, here's a shipping noise metric from Mars as a function of hour of day and monthly median levels. What you can see right away is the first period of voluntary vessel speed reduction, blue whales, blue skies, in 2023 clearly had the lowest levels of noise of our entire time series. And I think there's no doubt that part of that contribution to quieting is the slowing down of vessels. So what you're looking at in these maps is the percentage of vessel speeds. These are participating vessels that are traveling at less than 10 knots. And the sanctuary boundaries are in black, and you can clearly see higher percentage of speeds less than 10 knots during the VSR period of actually 23 and 24 compared to a reference period before that. So this is really phenomenal news. They're also slowing down in a sanctuary north of us, and there seems to be other effects even outside the sanctuary. But as vessels have to make choices about logistics, they might also choose to reroute and not go through the sanctuary more slowly, but go outside the sanctuary and be able to maintain speed. And that's what you're seeing here. Same 2 years of data where we're directly comparing the occupancy of these participating vessels. And the difference, simply quantified as minutes per day, you see a decrease in the sanctuary and an increase skirting the sanctuary boundaries. So that's when we think about conservation, this is critical perspective to consider as well. So that is all I had, and I'd be glad to answer questions.
Thank you so much, John. I mean, I don't even know where to start from because it's just so beautiful. The entire presentation was just so amazing, and I feel like I have to live all over again if I want to study oceanography so beautifully. We are not taught so much. Um, I would urge, I do have questions, but I'd urge there are a few. Divya Panikar is here who's studying blue whales in India at the moment, acoustically. And if anyone has questions, please put on your video and your mic, and you can ask directly if you have any questions. And if you cannot put your media on, just tell me if it's because of my settings. Yeah. Um, does anyone have any questions? John, at some at one stage you said, as long if they have more food, they're going to stay there. They're not go. So I think I may be wrong in saying it the way I'm saying it. We have that, we have these populations of humpback whales and pygmy blue whales in the Arabian Sea area, and I guess one of they don't migrate. They don't do the long migrations. The humpback whales don't do the long migrations too. And one of the theories is because of the land mass that's on the top, where all the stuff is going on right now. And the other theory could be is that there's just enough food for them to do everything. They can do their breeding and their foraging, everything in the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal, probably. So, matters more. Do you think the whales would want to go around Sri Lanka and go explore somewhere else, or are they just happy because there's enough food? Um, Divya, you want to go first before John tries to respond to that silly question? Yeah. Yeah. Divya? Yeah.
Hi, I hope you can hear me and can you
Yes,
see? I just put on the video. Hi, thank
I
you,
can
John.
hear and
That was
see
such
you.
a fantastic presentation. Thank you for doing this for us on this part of the world. And yeah, I mean, I think the Bani's question has been so exciting for us over here in terms of why the whales spend uh, time over here, or they're resident in some ways. So we're doing a blue whale project and trying to sort of get the resources in place. So both Dipani and I have started putting out passive acoustic recorders in the southeastern Arabian Sea, and we have a, a similar system in the sense that we have coastal upwelling because of the monsoon, and there is a eddy system, an anticyclonic eddy system called the Lakshadweep high versus low. It's seasonal. And we are also now hearing blue whales in our shallow water hydrophones. We haven't been able to go deeper than like 30 meters at this point. The bunnies was around 40 meters. So we are trying to build the infrastructure right now in terms of at least starting to get people together and get infrastructure together. Uh, However, the oceanography is a little bit more accessible when we look at satellite products and so on. And your study, especially, is extremely interesting for us because some of the processes are quite similar over here in terms of the coastal upwelling and what we think, may be happening in terms of krill aggregations and so on. But of course, we don't know many of those steps. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's just fascinating. And I feel like every slide, there's so many questions to ask. But I think the main one is what Dipani was saying about, uh, the system itself being kind of an enclosed sea in the Arabian Sea. And we know we have these species that spend all year around. And of course, the pygmy blue whales are smaller. And we are seeing a lot more acoustic diversity in the Indian Ocean as well. We're seeing a lot more different songs. Very little ground truthing in the Northern Indian Ocean in terms of, actually seeing and hearing at the same time. Which again, we want to try and do more oceanographic measurements. We want to be out on the water more, but it's more resource intensive. And we are also, from a study that Dipani and I were just finishing up, we are also seeing some signals or some calls that we haven't really recorded before. Or have seen much in the literature. So that's also very interesting in terms of who's there and, at what species. And another parallel is the fact that we have a very heavy shipping traffic lane in the southeastern Arabian Sea, the ones that's coming from the Middle East, going towards East Asia. So that is also an aspect we want to aspire to in terms of, so we've looked at studies such as yours, the Whale Safe, and the one on the eastern coast as well to, look at, what are the risks of ship collision, and that's also coming through this area. So that's where we want to get to at some point. But yeah, it's still a fledgling study. And I think we are going to have some of this data coming up by this coming monsoon. So looking forward to, seeing what all of that comes up. Yeah, what comes up with that.
Yeah, I'm sure we do have many questions in common, many goals and purposes in common, for sure. And it's been a long time since I've thought about the physical oceanography in your region. By that, I mean like 30 years. But these are questions I would need to refresh on the physical oceanography and what we know about, for example, the blue whale population in your region. And given that physical oceanography and the resulting prey species ecology, how does that drive their life history strategy? I'd have to refresh on all that, but I guess I would say we have a short time today, but we can continue the conversation and questions going forward. For now, I would just say, yeah, let's do that. And I do see a question in the chat that I could address, but let me say two things. Glad to answer any specific questions by, someone chiming in or by this one written.
Yeah. Do you want to ask yourself, Priyank, or should I ask a question for you?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. My question is the same. With rapid ocean warming altering krill availability, do you think blue whales will adapt through behavioral flexibility, or are we likely to see long-term population fragmentation?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a timely one too. There's another study I didn't share, but it's along these lines, right? So in a way, marine heat waves give us a glimpse into what the future may be with warming. So these heat waves are massive, widespread, and they can be persistent. The strongest one recently in our region was 2014 to 2016, and it affected the entire Eastern North Pacific. And what we learned from integrating a lot of different types of data, yes, passive acoustic monitoring, and also forage species abundance and diversity, diets of the whales that you can assess through stable isotopes from small skin samples, and photo ID, which gives you a more accurate metric of the number of unique individuals seen in your region day after day. Leveraging ecotourism, actually. and machine learning to identify individuals. Integrating those data, what we think we learned is that blue whales are more susceptible than humpback whales to these heat wave effects or warming effects. Why? Because the only food they eat really in our region plummeted, krill. Humpback whales experienced that as well, but when the krill plummeted, anchovy were available. So they have that dietary flexibility, prey switching. Humpbacks do that, blue whales do not. And we think we could hear that in the amount of song detected, specifically at a branching point in this 6-year time series. Fish abundance skyrocketed, and so did the song occurrence of humpback whales, whereas krill, after rising, plummeted again, and blue whale song decreased. So there's this relationship between forage availability and how much they sing. And we can imagine why that would be, right? Because if you're spending all your time just trying to get enough calories, you might have less time and energy for singing, you know? So that also, just like the acoustic signature of migration, we might have an acoustic signature of, in a sense, forage resources on longer interannual timescales.
And also, I have another question. Is there any like fear factor that is happening, like behaviorally, with the whales because of the ship traffic and everything?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
Because of the ship trafficking, are there any behavioral like fear factors that is happening in whales? Do you see that?
The best studies for how whales might perceive an oncoming ship and react or respond to it, that comes from biologging, tags riding on the backs of the whales so that we have that behavioral context. What did the animal do when that gigantic ship came at it? And Megan McKenna has led some really great work on that, among others. But I'll highlight one study led by her. What she showed is that when a large ship was coming toward a blue whale, it did have a behavioral response. It slowly submerged below the surface. But of course, that whale didn't evolve. That species didn't evolve to know what a ship is and all. So they're still susceptible to ship strike risk because there was no lateral evasive maneuvers. It just slowly sank. But the ships go down so deep that the whale would still be struck. And further, most of the radiated noise is coming out the back of the ship. And so with the bow of the ship being what's approaching the whale, in a sense, it's not like as effective of a signal for getting the attention of the whale, with that, in that arrangement. So yeah, I think the short story is we have to recognize with good scientific research the limits of their adaptation and their ability to avoid harmful anthropogenic impacts like strikes and noise and so.
Thank you.
I had some few very simple questions, I guess I can say, because the oceanography slides were just so beautiful that I think I want to go through the entire presentation again before I ask you anything. But when we've been talking only about foraging behavior, what about, have you had instances where there's more singing in the presence of calves? Or is there any other, the song has to do with what? And the fact that they sing more at night has to do with what? At least at certain times of the year. Do they sing to keep in touch with each other? Is there more singing when there are more calves? Do we have any such information? That was one thing that came to mind. And the other thing is,
Yeah.
can you tell us a bit more about, not right now, maybe later, but the setup that you have offshore? It sounds like an amazing place to have that setup to collecting all that oceanographic data. And how much does a biologger cost if you don't mind telling.
Okay, well, let's see. Which
These are
question
dreams,
should I
these are
start
dreams
with,
that we've
Tipani?
grown
Which
up with. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
so no, those are all great questions. I think I feel like a juggler who's dropping all the balls now, but you know, but let me see if I can pull a few of them out. Well, let's say singing, let's start with singing, it is one acoustic behavior. It's only the males, and it does have obviously some relationship to breeding. Demonstrating, fitness perhaps is often how it's thought of. And yet, if it was just about that, why would we hear them singing so much of the year? Anyway, but with regard to calves and interactions between males, females, mothers, calves, there's a lot of interesting research on that, primarily about humpback whales that I've seen. And so there's evidence, for example, that singing behavior among males can mediate both interactions between males and interactions between males and females and calves. There's evidence for both. But I think, one starting point is simply to recognize again that acoustically, that is how they can stay in contact over great distances. There's plenty of evidence of call and response, maintaining acoustic contact during migration, for example. These are all well supported by some literature, and yet still have many open questions, right? Because it's hard for us to imagine what it's like to be a whale. It's hard for us to have that what do they call it? Umwelt. How can you know what the sensory capacity and experience of another being is when it's so different from your own? But nonetheless, we do our best by piecing together what we see and what we hear and what we measure. So that's, song is a big topic. I think I hope it came through that I focused on song in this study and in a lot of research because it's such an abundant signal. However, we also study the foraging calls, and Will Astrike is doing some beautiful work right now on the foraging hotspots that we can detect with another type of call you didn't see or hear. It's the D call made by males and females. And basically, these two foraging hotspots, we see animals sounding off, not just when they're intensively foraging at these locations, but as they're moving between them, kind of like, hey, I'm gonna go over this one, check it out. And if you can hear your conspecifics from, 100 kilometers away, you can use that social information to collectively sense a vast habitat and know, is it worth me swimming all the way over there? Sure sounds like it. So anyway, many good questions, and each one kind of needs its own dive into, well, here's what the literature has so far. What combination of sensing at what scales would be needed to answer this next question?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what my second and third questions were, but that's fine. Yeah, Divya, go ahead.
I just
Sorry, I
question
dropped them.
I think the biologger, how much it costs. That
That's a good question. Now, the people, I personally have not deployed a tag on a whale. We collaborate with multiple other research labs who do that at Stanford, at UC, University of California, Santa Cruz, with Cascadia Research Collective, which is in Olympia, Washington. All of these people have been doing this for decades. And as you might guess, the technology has evolved a lot in decades. And they're getting more and more capable with what you can sense. For example, the Goldbogen lab at Stanford developed a heart rate monitor. Guess how low the heart rate of a blue whale drops during a feeding dive? How many beats per minute? How many beats per minute? Hold up your hands. No guesses?
Gosh, no, I've never even thought.
So it can get as low as 2 beats per minute when they're down feeding. And then to recover from that oxygen deficit of all the effort of feeding, it can rise up to 40 beats per minute at the surface. A huge range in a heart rate for a heart the size of a car.
Yeah. It's all about the muscles, isn't it? They have those, oh gosh, my physiology, marine mammal physiology was like 30 years ago. But they have the ability to go into that anaerobic state from what I remember, the heart muscles. Yeah.
Mm. And I know I didn't answer your question about the cost of a tag, but the answer is it depends. It depends on what sensing you have on that tag, whether or not it's commercially available and makes the measurements you need, and therefore has some economy of scale to purchase. But also, there's in a way, the much bigger part of that. Even if you could buy it off the shelf, it's important. I'm stating the obvious here. It's important to collaborate with people who have been doing this long enough and know how to do this safely. And because these are, it is dangerous in its own way. It's dangerous, right? These are brave people who get out there and put tags on the backs of 100-ton animals.
I was wondering about the acoustic vector sensors also, in terms of how comparable it is with single hydrophones in cost, and if there is a way to use two hydrophones, omnidirectional hydrophones, and I mean, we can get a bearing with two. If that is something we should explore further, if we can't afford acoustic vector sensor.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And arrays of omnidirectional hydrophones have been used for a long time along those lines, as you described. The trick is you have to know time pretty exactly on every node. So if there's clock drift in a standalone hydrophone like a sound trap, you would have to do you'd have to, I guess, do the back of the envelope calculation for how precise that needs to be to get a reliable bearing. But you can do things like, okay, I know exactly what time it is when I deployed this hydrophone. I've got GPS time synchronized with this hydrophone. And then you pick it up, and before you plug it in to download your data, because the clock's going to stop right then, the recording's going to stop, so you'll know when that last sample was. You have an exact time reference. You can at least do something like, oh, well, during this 3-month deployment, the clock drifted 10 minutes in one direction. So I'm going to assume that was a linear clock drift, and I'm going to correct all my timing based on this assumption. Then your standalone nodes can be perhaps, I don't really know, but accurate enough to try to do bearing estimation based on time difference of arrival. I think it's a good idea to try once you convince yourself. Maybe start by evaluating the clock drift on the sound traps by communicating with the manufacturer about an estimate and measuring it yourself. Then you'll know, okay, yeah, this is worth trying. So let's do this. Now let's just try the clock drift correction. And let's get a time period where there's a lot of blue whale calling, when you can match up those, not just individual calls, but what those sequences look like. So you're really sure of your matchup, like, oh, there were 3 blue whale calls in a minute, followed by 1 the next minute. I know I'm matching these accurately. Sorry, that was obvious. But anyway, these are the things I think about when starting a new direction.
In our data set here, we got foraging calls, right? Divya, from what I remember, the ones that we got in May. And of course, we don't have krill here. So, but what is it that they feed on? So this entire layer of data is completely missing. The whole prey density data set that y'all are able to capture there, because of your entire setup, isn't it, Panic?
Yeah.
We're missing that layer of
Yeah.
data. Yeah, we have to depend on
We
landing
know from
data
some
set.
studies that they also feed on surgested shrimp
Shrimp, that's
and
what.
euphausids.
Mm.
But in terms of, actual data of what species and how they're distributed, and I mean, it's not available as publicly. I think there are surveys going on, but not publicly available. Um, yeah, so
Yeah.
that was one of the things that we were also, I mean, I don't want to take up the question answer if anyone else has a question. So we can maybe check in and then I can ask the last question. Does anybody else have questions?
Just one reflection, and that is that, our institute is not doing all of this. When we put together these different data sets, the federal government is supporting fisheries related surveys that tell us about the forage species and so on. So it's never one institution. So if you're aware of maybe not publicly available data on forage species, but it's there somewhere. Maybe it needs some processing, especially if it's acoustic, to get to something quantitative. But maybe it's trawl surveys that are still going to give you something useful. Just finding those people who want their data to be used in these ways for ecology and conservation goes a long way. If they'll commit and say, yeah, we'll share the data and we'll help you understand how to use it. That's our case for sure.
How lovely.
Yeah. So one of the link to that is also, since such data, I mean, acoustically, it's not really available in terms of echo sounder data and so on. But one of the things that we often have trouble convincing folks is that, or even asking for big infrastructural funding or project funding and so on, is in terms of, apart from a species specific way, how to think about blue whales in their habitat, and of course the conservation aspect of ship strikes. But we were also, I mean, given this really tight link between blue whales and their prey, which is actually not even forage fish, it's zooplankton, that as far as we know, or shrimp. So we were wondering, how we can actually also give data back to managers and fisheries Departments in terms of weaving that into fisheries forecast models or so on, so that it can happen both ways. Do you have any insights from the region over there in terms of how this is also, has blue whale data been used in forecast models and so on, in fisheries forecast models there?
Yeah, there's one really good example of how NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, it's humpback whales where this has been particularly important. Entanglement in fishing gear has been a primary cause of concern and injury to these animals. So they regulate the opening and closure of particularly the Dungeness crab fishery based on sighting data. They'll delay the opening or close it temporarily to reduce that risk of entanglement. So that's one example. But for blue whales, the example I want to emphasize here is I invite you to go read the web pages of Protecting Blue Whales and Blue Skies. And I say that because more than any program I've seen, they've been so effective at bringing together all the stakeholders, government, yes, industry, most importantly, voluntary buy-in, port authorities, and nonprofits and academics. they brought all these groups together in a common purpose that is all ultimately voluntary. And what you'll see a video on there where the person who started the program is talking on a radio to a ship operator. And I want you to just point you to that video and watch it, because it kind of speaks to the power of common purpose and voluntary participation in a common purpose. And the last thing I want to say about it is every year they have an award ceremony where representatives from the shipping companies come to the Port of Los Angeles, and they are given awards for their levels of participation. Originally, the program gave them a nominal monetary award, but what they told the program manager is, we don't need the money. We want the recognition for being a green shipping company, a responsible shipping company. And that's where the power is. You can tap into the economics of being a favorably viewed company. And if that motivates your participation to protect whales, wonderful. So I would encourage you to actually talk with the Blue Whales, Blue Skies group. Reach out to them. They're very responsive. They have so much experience in navigating these relationships that need to be built. Their program is expanding to the entire US and beyond. It's expanding internationally because people are recognizing, wow, this is a great model for how we can make progress in conservation through positive incentive ultimately.
Right.
I just had one thing connected to what Divya was asking, and then I think we can wrap it up. I'm sure you're getting late too. Is a lot of us are now trying to, at least when we speak with fishermen and all, we use the large whales as sentinels of ocean health. That where the whales are, that's where the system is healthy, where there'll be more food productivity and all of that because of the whale pump. So in that sense, has anybody from your group or have the blue whale presence in that area, has it ever been connected to ocean health? The fact that they're there all the time. Has it been added into models that show that the fisheries there are far more sustainable or healthy, or the upwellings have something to do rather than the upwellings attracting the whales? Is it cyclical? Like, do you get what I'm trying to say? I mean, it's
I
not just,
do.
yeah.
Yeah, and you're touching into a few research areas there. First one is whales as ecosystem sentinels, and that's a long-standing perspective that has been here as well. That if we understand the top predators, not just whales, but the health of top predator populations, that tells us about the health of the ecosystem. And also, you're getting into how the whales themselves are part of making the ecosystem healthy. And the research for that was some really important research on that was led by the same group for which I showed you the ground truth for acoustic vector sensing, the Goldbogen lab at Stanford, and their collaborators. They showed with biologging data from around the globe, including Southern Ocean, even way down south, that if you accurately quantify how much whales are consuming, baleen whales in particular, and that account for the fact that they are often foraging at depth where the krill aggregate, trying to stay in the dark out of the sunlight, and then they release that as feces and nutrients at the surface, they're actually pumping nutrients in the ocean ecosystem. And so there's very good science on that shows before we decimated whale populations, they were contributing a tremendous amount to biogeochemical cycling, krill abundance and populations, which is a positive feedback for the whole ecosystem. So yeah, there's some really good science on that as well. I think we're just beginning to understand that, and we're beginning to realize how much commercial whaling changed ecosystem structure and function.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah, it was such an amazing talk. Thank you so much,
Well,
John. I don't know if I'm sure that we'll be sharing the link to the talk, and more people might write to you separately over email and things like that. Because a lot
yeah,
of
please do
people,
reach out.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. A lot of people in the East are just sleeping right now, I think. So I'm sure I usually share the link later on of the video, and we'll share your contact details also. Yeah.
Well, likewise, thanks for the opportunity to share some of our research and interests. And thanks for all the good work you're doing in your region. Let's take care of these whales.
Yeah, let's do that. We're trying, dreaming, trying, doing what we can. And
I love
yeah.
it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone else,
Yeah,
for joining.
thanks
Thank
all.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.